Today we tell the story of Major Lewis Redmond, an Appalachian moonshiner who became both an outlaw and a folk hero, called by some at the time the King of the Moonshiners. His life of whiskey, gunfire, and escape made him a legend across the Carolinas. And it's another one of the stories of Appalachia.
Well, Steve, it seems like a lot of the best moonshiners came out of the Carolinas. And of course, we know the story about NASCAR and everything of running moonshine and so forth. But I didn't know the story about Lewis Redmond until now.
Well, I didn't know about it until I happened across an old book about moonshiners. And this was
Hmm.
written by, I guess it was a revenue agent who
Hmm.
talked about some of the famous moonshiners that they had encounters with. And he was probably the most well known. And as you'll see, he was kind of like a truly folk hero in the press back in the 1800s.
Wow, let's hear it.
All righty. Well, folks, Lewis Redmond was born sometime in the late 1840s, early 1850s. Accounts differ, so we don't know for sure. But he was born in the Maple Springs section of what's now Swain County, North Carolina. His home changed often as his family moved about North and South Carolina during his early years. Well, Redmond became quite a celebrity during his lifetime, so much so that he had, get this, Rod, a dime novel romance written about him by the time he was 26. Not only that, he had a full biography published when he was the ripe old age of 28. He even made the front page of the New York Times. Now, Redmond came of age in the wake of the Civil War, a time when Appalachian families faced hardship, ruined farms, and very little cash. And whiskey at that time became a survival strategy. You see, corn could be turned into liquor, liquor could be sold or traded, and suddenly what might have been a worthless crop became valuable. Redmond was taught distilling by his father and others, and by the time he was 21, he was already skilled in running stills.
Well, folks, you got to remember one thing. This whole thing of moonshining, making whiskey and everything dates back even across the pond over to England, Ireland, Scotland, all those places, and it carried over to the New World also. And at a young age, he showed natural leadership too. Hanging around Confederate camps during the Civil War, he earned the nickname Major. Now, the name stuck because it fit him. He was tall, muscular, black haired, and he was quick with his wits. He seemed born to command. He was described as strong as a cat, sharp eyed, and charming, qualities that made him, made the men follow, and yes, the women admire him. All that set the stage for a career that would make him both notorious and also loved, with some even calling him a modern day Robin Hood for standing up to federal revenue laws. But the same qualities that drew people to him, well, it's kind of like that other side of the coin. It made him dangerous. And in 1876, that danger came to the surface. By early 1876, Redmond hit on a unique idea for selling his liquor. I've heard this kind of thing before. Hey, I've got a unique idea for selling my liquor. Home delivery. Well, we've talked about Mahalia Mullins and the drive-in, so to speak, picking up some liquor and things. Well, this was home delivery. He began hauling his shine to customers throughout the region. And this caught the attention, you guessed it, of the law, and federal revenue agents obtained an arrest warrant.
You know, Rod, I wonder if there's not somebody, surely there's somebody somewhere that has some way of doing this online, kind of like a moonshine version of Grubhub, you think?
Yeah, I'm wondering that may be an idea, Steve, if no one's come up with it. And we hope we haven't put that thought in some of our listeners' heads. Maybe we can do it. So, anyway,
Oh,
let's go
my
on.
goodness, my goodness. Well, on March 1st, 1876, Lewis Redmond was driving a wagon load of whiskey across Walnut Hollow Road in the East Fork section of Transylvania County when 24-year-old Deputy U.S. Marshal Alfred Duckworth stopped him. Now, Duckworth read out a warrant for his arrest, pistol in hand. Redmond appeared calm, even a bit resigned. "All right, put up your pistol, Alf," he said. "I'll go along with you." But when Duckworth lowered his weapon, Redmond immediately pulled out a hidden derringer and fired point blank into the Marshal's throat. The bullet tore through, carrying Duckworth's collar button with it, and it's said that Marshal Duckworth staggered to a nearby creek for a drink, but the water poured right out of the hole in his throat. He collapsed and died on the spot. And in that instant, Lewis Redmond had gone from a small-time moonshine distiller to a murderer on the run. He fled south into Pickens County, South Carolina, a place called Dark Corners for its reputation for violence, outlaws, and moonshine. And there he flourished. He organized a gang of armed men who protected his stills and terrorized federal agents. He raided the homes of officers, ambushed those who came after him, and spread fear across the mountains. At the same time, to the people who lived there, he became a hero, a man who stood up to federal revenuers, who resisted taxes they saw as unjust, and who lived as he wished on his own terms.
Well, of course, we're that same way. I hate paying
Mm-hmm.
taxes. I don't want to pay taxes on my liquor. Well, I'll make my own liquor, and that's what Major Redmond did. And he took advantage of that reputation as well. He was clever, using, yes, even disguises, like something out of Mission Impossible almost 100 and some years earlier, and he would use those disguises to move whiskey right under the nose of the federal revenuers and the marshals. Well, George Atkinson, in his 1881 book, After the Moonshiners, tells one story of Redmond heading to Asheville with 5 barrels of whiskey hidden under corn husks. Dressed in a fake beard and plain, rough clothes, he didn't look at all like himself. 3 U.S. Marshals, armed with pistols and Winchester rifles, stopped him on the road, and instead of panicking, Redmond struck up a conversation. He played dumb, folks, put on a country drawl, and insisted, "Nobody makes whiskey anymore. It's too dangerous, even with all the marshals around." Well, when he was pressed, he admitted that he had a little for his stomach's sake to kind of help him out, and even offered to give them a little. Well, they gladly drank with him. That's right, and then they let him go. He rode on to Asheville, whiskey barrels intact, having fooled them completely. And this was not his only trick. Time after time after time after time, he dodged lawmen. He was arrested in Liberty, South Carolina in 1877 after being tricked into coming to a house to make a delivery. There, he and his driver, Amos Ladd, fell asleep waiting for the customers to arrive and were arrested by officers who raided the place. Redmond, though, managed to escape almost immediately.
Furious, he stalked and shot at the officers until Ladd escaped too. Later, still angry, he got revenge by raiding one officer's home, kidnapping his wife and stealing his 2 best horses. He eventually returned the wife and one horse, but rode off on the other after buying a round of drinks at a bar. Now, stories like that spread quickly, and his reputation only grew. Redmond wasn't just surviving, he was embarrassing the government, and people loved him for it. In 1879, Redmond shifted his base to the Smokies, settling near what would later become Bryson City. His arrival kicked off a boom in moonshine traffic there. He built a cabin against a cliff with only one approach and a canoe stashed at the river below. And from that base, he spread the word that there wasn't enough men in Swain County to arrest him. Many residents either ignored his illegal activities or quietly supported him.
Federal agents raided his cliffside hideout 3 times. On the first time that they raided, he got word in advance, and he managed to slip downstream in that canoe and hide out. On the second time, he got away by climbing out of an escape hole he'd built in the back of his cabin just as officers came through the front door. Each escape made him larger than life. But in April of 1881, his luck finally ran out. Redmond's wife asked him to go and fetch a squirrel for supper. And after she heard the dogs bark in the woods, thinking that they had one treed, Shotgun in hand, he walked into a clearing only to find not a squirrel, and not a squirrel holding a gun at him, but a half a dozen heavily armed federal officers who stepped out from behind a rock, and they shouted, "Halt!" Redmond did not halt. Instead, he turned and he ran, fast as his legs could carry him. And every time they yelled for him to stop, well, guess what he did? He ran instead, and bullets whistled through the air, striking him. He was hit again and again, 5, 6 times, but he still managed to keep on going. The National Police Gazette interviewed Redmond about the incident, in which he told the story in his own words. "I knowed them wasn't no squirrels, and I turned around and I left. They kept a hollering, 'Halt!' and a shooting, and every once in a while I'd feel a bullet hit me. They followed me, and every once in a while hitting me till they could got me cotched up there in the holler, about 200 yards from the house." Well, the New York Times reported he was dead, but Redmond, of course, was much more smarter than that, and he was strong too, and stubborn to boot. Against all odds, he lived, though his days as a free outlaw were over.
Hey, Rod, have you ever heard of the National Police Gazette? Are you
Yes, I
familiar
have,
with
a
it?
long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah, you know that's the 19th century version of what we would call like the National Enquirer or the
Yeah,
Weekly
it's sort of
World
like this
News or that kind of stuff. Yeah.
true crimes, that sort of thing, and they kind of embellished these stories and things like that, didn't they?
I think that's where clickbait originated, to be honest with you.
Yes, exactly.
So he was a big star with that kind of crowd and those kind of stories, but nevertheless, that made him a major figure in the moonshine world. Now, this major figure, Major Lewis Redmond, was hauled into federal court. In a deal with the prosecutors, Redmond was not charged with the murder of Marshal Alfred Duckworth. Instead, he pleaded guilty to violating revenue laws and to conspiracy, and the judge sentenced him to 10 years in the federal penitentiary in Auburn, New York. For a man used to freedom in the mountains, prison life was harsh. But after only 3 years of that 10-year sentence in 1884, none other than President Chester A. Arthur granted him a full pardon. Now, some believe politics played a role. Others say it was his growing status as a folk hero in the South. But either way, the outlaw Major Redmond walked out a free man. Surprisingly, when he got home, he tried to turn legitimate. He went to work for the Beeman Distillery in South Carolina. Now, the owners knew exactly what they had, a famous name. They put Redmond's face on bottles and marketed a brand called Redmond's Moonshine. Newspapers covered the story, with the New York Times calling him, quote, "a physical wreck and an invalid, weakened by tuberculosis, likely contracted in prison." Still, for a while, he lent his expertise to making legal liquor, proof of his talent at the still. And this sounds like somebody a little more recent that was in the moonshine trade, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, now, we're not going to mention Popcorn Sutton's name, but we may get back to that here in a minute.
Yeah, well, and I got something else to tell you too. When you were talking about prison life being so harsh,
Mm-hmm.
they sent him to New York. He was from the South. My great great grandfather had the same thing happen to him, except he was for defrauding the federal government. Now, when they sent him up north to Albany, New York. And when he
Ah,
got there, they treated the prisoners terribly. I mean, he watched his nephew die right in front of him. They drowned him. He said food was not even fit for a maggot to eat. So you can imagine that all of this stuff and this prison life being so harsh, I'm sure he was glad to get out of there.
yeah.
Well, Steve, in his final years, Redmond lived a quiet life. He farmed, he raised his children, worked where he could, and the rowdy outlaw who once commanded gangs and terrorized revenuers now lived as a husband and a father. He and his wife had 2 sons and 7 daughters, and for them, well, he was no outlaw or dime novel hero. He was simply family. By 1906, his tough old body had just simply given out. Major Lewis Redmond died near Seneca, South Carolina. At his grave, his family had this epitaph carved into the stone: "He was the sunshine of our life."
How sweet that was, I tell you.
Yeah.
I mentioned Popcorn Sutton, and
Hmm.
folks, this is like a 19th century version, turbocharged of Popcorn
Hmm.
Sutton. Of course, Popcorn didn't go out with rifles and shooting, revenuers and all that stuff, but he did become like a market brand, at
Hmm.
least after his death, when he had Moonshine named after him.
Yeah. And when we talk about this thing about having the gangs and the defense and everything like that, well, Steve's right. Popcorn Sutton didn't have that, but there are some similarities here, because what did Popcorn Sutton do that Major Lewis Redmond did? They challenged law enforcement, is what they
Hmm.
did.
Yep.
You can't come and get me. If you put me in jail, I'm going to get right back out again and go right back to doing what I've always done. And it's much of the same thing here with Major Lewis Redmond.
Yeah. Yeah, he was quite a character. As I said about that magazine, the Police Gazette, yeah, it was something that I think they went after some of the seedier stories of
Hmm.
the time, the Victorian times, and that really got them a lot of attention. And so when he got into that particular magazine, that just really did it for him. And at this point, here we are, 150 years later, still talking about him.
Yeah, and you know what? For some reason, I don't know where you brought that up of the National Police Gazette. For
Hmm.
some reason, I'm thinking one of the people that we have talked about on one of our earlier podcasts. I'm thinking Tout Hall may have been mentioned in the National Police Gazette, and some others over some local outlaws and things like that, but over what they were involved in. And so, yeah, this was sort of like your almost, it was like the 19th century, early 20th century version of Facebook. You just didn't know what was going to be put on there. I mean, that's just as plain and simple as it could be.
Oh, goodness. Well, quite a story, Rod. And this story is the story of Major Lewis Redmond, the moonshiner who defied the law and became a legend in the mountains. And it's another one of the stories of Appalachia. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the Stories Podcast on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss any of our stories of Appalachia. Till next we meet, y'all take care. So long, everybody.
So long.